So IDP is actually is started separately from the Department of Grain Science and Industry, but the goal has been pretty much the same for the last 47 years or 46, whatever it is. Is our goal is to provide technical assistance and education mainly to international buyers of U.S. commodities. We focus on corn, sorghum, wheat, and corn, sorghum, wheat, soybeans. To provide technical assistance, so they ended up either buying it in a better way, doing a better job storing it, processing, making feed. And of course, we also touch a little bit there on the animal nutrition and other areas, depending on the need.
Here from North Carolina State University, this is Adam Fahrenholz and the Feed Science Podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Carlos Campabadal. He is an outreach specialist and faculty member in the International Grains Program at Kansas State University. How are you doing today, Carlos?
Hi, Adam. I'm doing very well, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Yeah, happy to have you. So Carlos will be our, I don't know how many of K-Staters we have. We keep having folks from K-State either that either went to school there or are currently there, which is great. Certainly something that it's nice to reconnect with everybody. And Carlos and I go a little ways back. He was brought on as a program specialist when I guess I would have somewhere in my graduate program there, kind of the early 2000s. So we've gotten to do some things over the years, and it's good to connect again. So Carlos has you've got an interesting opportunity in your particular position to work with a lot of different folks kind of around the world on feed manufacturing, grain handling, all different kinds of things. Because of what the International Grain Program there at K-State does. But before we get into all that, your path originally started there in Costa Rica, and with some things with family operations. So why don't we go back to where everything started for you, and give us your background on where you came from and how you got to be where you're at now, and then what you're currently up to.
Yeah, great. No, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So, I pretty much, I will say, I grew up in a very unique position in terms of. I didn't grow up in a farm, but I grew up in the city. But all the weekends we went to work in our family farm. So it all started with a swine farm. So my family has been linked to agriculture for many years. My dad was a professor, a consultant in animal nutrition, focusing on very unique in dairy and monogastric. And that kind of led me be involved since I was a little kid in our swine farm. And also we do have a family integrated and, of course, commercial feed mill. So that's where pretty much all started. I mean, since I was a little kid helping there. And then as things evolve, I actually am a mechanical engineer. So at some point I realized, I like the machines, I like the equipment. Let's see what that brings. And that turned to another. But anyway, during college, I still helped on the farm on the weekends, sometimes during the weekdays, and in the feed mill as I got a little bit older. And that kind of set up the path. So finished college in Costa Rica. And the last year of college, I started working full time. So as a process engineer, maintenance also, pretty much, being a small operation for the U.S. standards, I guess, and mid-size in Costa Rica, you have to kind of do a little bit of everything. So drove trucks, quality control, clean, whatever it took during the time. And so I was there kind of a little bit like 3.5 years. And I was always looking into the grad school. So the question was always what to do, because I always kind of wanted to stay kind of within the line of feed manufacturing, grain storage. And so that led me to go to the University of Illinois, where I ended up doing a master's degree in agriculture engineering. That was what it was called during that time, focusing a little bit more into grain processing and grain handling. And the idea behind that, to be honest, was that I didn't have a strong background in terms of everything related to biology, chemistry, being a mechanical engineer. And so I figured this could be the transition to it. And it did work. So After that master's degree, it was always a question what to do. And so I stay actually doing like 8 months, 9 months, give or take, doing research for the university, project for one of the big companies in related to grain from Illinois. And then afterwards, I moved 100 miles east to Purdue University, where I ended up doing a PhD focusing on grain storage to complement the processing side in the Department of Agriculture and Biological Engineering. So, and during that time, I was working, doing a lot of extension too for the university. And my advisor during the time moved to Kansas State. So a little bit later on, Dr. Dirkmar, so he said, hey, you should come here and finish up your dissertation here with me. And that's how I ended up moving to K-State. So I joined part-time, being a program specialist, like you mentioned, that was 2010, like around March, April 2010. I started working there until the different things set up as a faculty position at IGP open, and I applied, and that was 2012, and that's been ever since that I've been there. But the fun part, in a way, is that I started, working at K-State and got excited with all the trainings and all the cool things that we're doing there, like you guys were doing on the feed and new things we're doing on storage, that I kind of left a little bit of the PhD on the side, but then I had to finish off, and that took me a little bit longer than I expected, but it turned out well. And a little bit funny on the side there too is that all my committee members were at Purdue except for my advisors. So my economical analysis, we wanted to get somebody from K-State, and I got a very good professor, Dr. Michael Angemar, but he ended up moving to Purdue. So all my committee that I needed to work were, remote. And, back in those days, we didn't, Zoom was starting, and we also had Adobe Connect and all those things. And so it worked out, but it was kind of funny from that sense. And so being there at IGP, full-time faculty since 2012, give or take, and other roles that I do there besides the outreach specialist, I also advise grad students. I'm grad faculty. I don't get students all the time. It just depends, because my appointment in research is we negotiate it on a year to year, and so it depends what's going on. And also I do extension leader for the department from that sense, but there's not too much lately out of it. It's more, typical extension, answer questions, do documents, things like that. So that's a little bit of my background from that sense. So.
Gotcha. Very good. So let's go into a little bit of what are the, especially since we have, based on what we're seeing from our audience numbers and things, we do have a fair amount of international interest in seeing what's going on and listening to these conversations. So with that particular in mind, can you describe a little bit of what the goals and overall reasons of being for the International Grains Program, for IGP?
Absolutely. So IGP is actually is started separately from the Department of Grain Science and Industry, but the goal has been pretty much the same for the last 47 years or 46, whatever it is our goal is to provide technical assistance and education mainly to international buyers of U.S. commodities. We focus on corn, sorghum, wheat, and soybeans, to provide technical assistance so they ended up either buying it in a better way, doing a better job storing it, processing, making feed. And of course, we also touch a little bit there on the animal nutrition and other areas, depending on the need. So IGP, that's our main goal or mission. But also at the end of the day, we also do, half of our market of participants in our short courses and trainings is also domestic. So we also provide that we put our extension hat there a little bit. It's kind of a thin line what doesn't mean outreach and extension, but I think we do both. I mean, there's just not too much difference. So IGP in essence, what we do is professional development. And in many ways, with a mission to promote U.S. commodities, but we help several organizations to create a market access and develop markets for these commodities, either by trainings or by going on site and helping them with different type of projects. So our main thing day to day is organized trainings, either open enrollment that anybody from anywhere in the world can sign up, or we do tailor-made, and that's probably our strongest part. We do partner with all the different grain export councils from the U.S., the U.S. Soybean Export Council, U.S. Grain Council that handles corn and sorghum, and Jews with Associates that I'm actually right now working for them on a couple of projects like today. So that's a little bit of that. But also we do short courses for other universities, private companies, even NGOs, give or take. But besides that, since we're actually and it varies, but it is almost like a third of our funding comes from the state commissions that produce grain in the state of Kansas, and Kansas sorghum, Kansas corn, soybean and wheat commissions. And so part of that is also to help these organizations and their missions to promote this grain. So we see it a little bit on the marketing, but we do different type of projects that sometimes also include research, more into the applied thing, to help all this international companies do a better job and create those markets for those grains. So in essence, besides trainings, I think we're kind of like more like a professional development, more into the industry level, supporting organization in a way.
Sure. Would it be fair to say, and based on what I remember doing with IGP when I was there in school, and some of the other things that I do, that we do here at NC State, when we're also working with some of those same export councils, a lot of the things that they would come to you as far as wanting to get into markets actually has a lot to do with value add, right? They will come to somebody like IGP, or they will come to somebody like us, and they will say, hey, we would really like for people in this country to be more interested in buying, let's say, U.S. soy. One of the reasons that we can get them more interested in doing something with U.S. soy is we are going to sponsor educational programs. We're going to help with outreach, even if it's not specifically, I think the common thought would be, oh, well, we're promoting this particular commodity. And it's more, I think in a lot of cases, no, we're promoting that if you will work with this organization, there's a lot of value to you because of the different opportunities they can provide and access to things like education. Is that a fair way to put that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And yes. And of course, with NC State that we have worked together too. I mean, it's just they rely a lot on these organizations with U.S. academic institutions to do that. And that actually, I have to say, my father actually worked for the U.S. Soybean Export Council for many years, and it used to be called American Soybean Association, which is still an organization, but more into the domestic government affairs type of deal. But with the way that those organizations go and the way they do outreach and help promote those commodities, they bring that value. And I have to say that all this time that I have helped them and worked with them, even before my time with K-State, I noticed that, a lot of industries have benefited a lot to grow. I mean, companies that were just startups now become, big companies in their own countries, even go beyond their own boundaries to other countries too. So that investment, that the majority of that money, as some people know, comes from the farmers itself that fund it, so through their checkoff program, and that has a value. And there's different numbers out there that say that for every dollar that a farmer invests, they get X number of dollars back, and that varies within a range between $7 to $20, depending on the commodity and the time. But I could say that support of value added is very important, and it does make a difference.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. I think the other really interesting thing, and I could do a lot less than you do. And so I'm going to ask you a question about working with folks from all around the world in different capacities. Because when I get to do it, it's always interesting to me how different things are from place to place, right? So when we think about feed manufacturing, it's the Feed Science Podcast. So when we think about feed manufacturing, most folks that are involved in feed manufacturing are very locked into what they're doing making feed, right? And because it is an all day, every day kind of engaged thing, you kind of get into this mindset of, well, the way that I'm making feed is the way that feed is made, right? So what would you say are some of the interesting things when you get to work, whether it be travel or when people are coming to IGP, when you get to work with these folks from different parts of the world? What are the interesting things that come up about just how different feed manufacturing can be from, major giant integrators here in the US to, very precise manufacturing that's done in maybe some small batch things in Europe, to third world that's just trying to get to be able to make their own feed? What are some of the interesting things that you see that are differences amongst the kind of the global feed footprint?
Oh yeah, no, and I agree with you. It's also for me very interesting, despite the fact that I've been doing there for several years now. But it's always something different, especially with the country, and some of those things are also even countries that are next to each other. They might do it even between them, different several things. But there's always one thing that always has. It's always kind of different in a way from how we do things in the U.S. is that the markets are a little bit different in a way, and I'll put it in different perspectives too. In the U.S., we do a lot of just corn and soybean diets. At the end of the day, the two main ingredients, the U.S. one of the top producers in both commodities, but in other places they use all those different type of ingredients that sometimes is just a little bit different how you handle, how you purchase them, their availability, and of course all the different nutritional composition to it. So that also triggers from the feed perspective different ways on how to handle making all those batches and the overall quality for somebody like, for example, making pellets. You just have to count more barrel rolls if you're thinking about how that specific feed ingredients affect the quality besides the operation and other things into it. But that's one of those. All this variety of things how are done. Also, in a way, there's different interesting things on some markets, how they're in a way, in the US is very competitive, but there's less players now these days, especially with the big integrators. But in other countries, there's companies that are both commercial, integrated, but they have to fight a market that is very limited at the end of the day because, smaller markets, and that has a different perspective on how they do things, specifically with logistics, with transportation, and, things like that. And then, of course, also on the quality. Quality in some cases, there's countries that put a lot of focus on quality, for example, in pelleting quality, that maybe other parts of the world don't do that much because they're looking more into volume instead of just overall quality. And that goes back a lot because of how you fight the market, so that's something very, very interesting. Of course, equipment-wise, you see something that depending, I always call it that, I'm more used to, growing up and then working in the U.S. with American equipment. But then, of course, you get some of the big European, they do more, post-mixing grinding or, post-grinding type of deals. They use more pre-grinding. So some of that perspective. And one thing that has pushed a lot, and all these expert councils understand it and they're working at, is that there's a big wave of sustainability too. A lot of those feed companies are looking into it, and now more in going into what is called a circular economy, which is very difficult in the feed industry because there's just not too much co-products that you can incorporate for other things, and how to circulate all those different resources back into the production. But we see that certifications of sustainability, the aquaculture industry is very big on that. And that's something very focused. The other thing, kind of like that, also moving a little bit besides on the pet food, for example, in the U.S., pet food is really very high quality, and there's different type of brands and qualities and things like that. But around the world, you kind of see that there's always this really economic type of pet food, more for rural side, and with more typical, assimilated to, let's say, a monogastric diet that we do in the U.S. And then you get into that premium and then super premium levels that is more what you see in the U.S. in terms of quality and how fast that is growing. So that always see how people are catching up into that worldwide. So that's something also that calls my attention for the last couple of years.
For sure. Yeah, we talk about it in a lot of different contexts, but we when we're bringing, let's say, students in, undergrads, and they're just coming in and they're learning about the nutrition production, animal production, and then certainly on the animal food production side of things, we talk about that a lot when it comes to developing countries. And, the first things we see when folks start getting a little bit more disposable income is they want more meat, which is going to be more food animal production, and they want pets. And if you're having a hard time, getting food for yourself, you're not going to have pets to feed as well. But as soon as that becomes a little more stable, we then all of a sudden see pets become a thing. And once pets become a thing, pet food becomes a thing. And then that's a whole different way of looking at things. Something else I was going to ask you about kind of in that, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit, when you have any interesting thoughts or stories or anything like that on when people maybe come to do training or to learn or brought in for whatever reason, things that when they get here and they learn about the U.S. feed manufacturing operations, when you take them out and go into feed mills or they see different kinds of programs, quality, are there things that you find that they're surprised that we don't do, that they think, wow, the U.S. feed industry is, big and great and it's got all of these, it's at the top of the line, but wait a minute, what do you mean you don't do that? Anything come to mind there?
Well, one that in a way is sometimes surprising, and not everybody, but for some countries, probably with a higher level of production and professionalism, let's say, they always surprise in terms of cleanliness. I joke, but sometimes we take into our own K-State feed mill or some of outside the commercial side, and some countries, some people are from some countries are saying like, wow, this is very clean. And some is like, wow, this is very dirty. But of course, when you're in a developing country that, with all due respect, that the cost of labor is cheaper, you have more people that could do that. In the US, in reality, that's something that we tend to go more into the automation because of the cost of labor, lack of personnel with skill sets to come into the industry. And I know that you have done a lot of good presentations and work on that. And it is something that has happened in the U.S., especially the last couple of years. So that's something that always kind of that people say, hey, why you guys don't do that? And then up to a point, also some parts of the country, especially in the developing world, you see a lot of people really focusing on how to save energy. And in the U.S. we do too, but the cost of electricity overall is cheaper compared to the majority of places, unless it is an oil production country. But how those resources are not really detailed. And yes, if in the U.S. we do it, it might take a little bit more. Doing that might be more costly than actually just let it go, but it does happen, and that always, at the end of the day, always surprised me how some people are really particular from that sense, and that sometimes even affect their own production because the cost of energy or the times they could produce because the cost of electricity is cheaper, like let's say early in the morning or in the evening. That affects many of the overall ways how production, administration all interact because they might not all be at the same time. So that's something that it is very surprising. And I will add another that it's that the way that in the U.S. everything is very well organized, in a way fairly automated. In other countries, they have to work 24 hours, and just keep going, even that in the commercial feed mill. In the U.S. also, but then you start expanding, and that happens. But in the other parts of the world, not necessarily that is the case. So that's always the 24/7. That's a lot of people do around the world. Always surprised me too. So.
Absolutely. Well, again, my guest today is Dr. Carlos Campabadal. He is an outreach specialist and faculty member in the International Grains Program at Kansas State University. So I kind of keeping on that international side of things and in its comparison. I think another thing that I find very interesting, and again, you just touched on a little bit there. Maybe talk a little bit more about it. Is the people that will come in, and certainly on the labor side, there's a difference potentially in skilled and unskilled labor. Although in the U.S. we're having some of the same issues now. Go find a good maintenance person, and if you do, you better hold on to them because they're getting harder and harder to come by. And that's a little more akin to what we see in other parts of the world where there's not so many people with that type of training. But I also find it very interesting that most of the time when we see somebody come in for trainings and things like that, we're usually talking to mill managers, operators, maintenance personnel, that sort of thing. And a lot of times when we see those international visitors and we say, well, is this a mill manager? What is it? And they're like, oh no, this is the person that owns 5 of these feed mills or something. And you go, oh, okay, it's a little different. And so I wonder what maybe those interesting interactions might be there too, when you're actually talking with people, getting more opportunity, I think, in a lot of cases. And I mean, it would be true here too. If somebody was going to go travel to the other side of the world, it's more likely to be the owner or the CEO or something like that than it's going to be, the shift operator of some sort. So it makes a certain amount of sense. But how do those interactions differ when you're, let's say, doing courses or trainings and you've got folks in the room that are, operator or supervisor type level versus, okay, the 4 people in this room are responsible for 30% of the feed production in their country, and they're the ones that own it. Does that create some different conversations?
Yeah, no, and you bring a very good point into it because, I always compare it when I do the domestic trainings, you get like you said, mill managers, operator, maintenance, and others. But sometimes it's very surprising when you get all these owners of very big companies around the world, Ben. But the conversation, yeah, it does change it. And I'll see it both ways, because when you get these people that own the companies or a CEO or something like that, they go there, maybe not necessarily just to know all the details of the technical news things that we're trying to train them on, but they go in and they see different things as they walk through the mill, as they interact with all the different trainers or instructors, professors, and they might get a new idea for their own business or how they can improve it because they see it more as a whole global company. When we work with the operation guys, like you said a little bit earlier in this podcast, is that female, you just focus on making feed that day and that's it, and that's usually more into the technical side that it's very detailed. But maybe this owner, CEO, they will see it as a whole, and include all the different areas. So in some cases, I have done feed manufacturing courses that we ended up talking more about U.S. grain grading or contracts, or logistics, because that also impacts for them, and especially that around the world, they buy a lot of their commodities from the U.S. So, and they when they come to Kansas State or NC State or any other university, you just walk out and they're grown there. So they want to learn more all about that. So conversation does shift, and they like to see a lot of big numbers, financial implications, and one thing is also indicators. How can they improve their performance? So that's what you have to really balance off instead of just going very technical. For example, how you work with some specs on a pellet mill or hammer mill. More overall, how you manage a feed mill, how you look at different things like maintenance and operations and safety from a whole perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of the interesting things from the training perspective overall is that depending on who is there, it really gives, a really good picture of just all the different things that have to go on. Like you just said, like some people were training on the regulatory aspect, and others are being trained on safety, and others are being trained on just making feed, and others on actually maintaining the equipment. And when you kind of live it every day, whether it be teaching it or out in the world doing education or consulting or being someone in the feed mill making feed, you live it every day, and it's kind of, yeah, it's all one big box and everything goes on. But when you think about all the different aspects that are going on inside that feed mill, it's a little overwhelming when you start actually parsing it out. So before we kind of wrap up here, very similar, to what we do here at NC State. We've got our every fall we do our production school that we do with Carolina Feed Industry Association, and we allow folks to come in and do and sit through trainings. We've got a few different programs within a 1 week that we do. It's usually in October, November every year. Obviously, IGP, as you said, you guys have you guys will do individualized courses if somebody specifically wants one for themselves, but you also have some public courses that folks can enroll in. Do you want to maybe mention to that so that folks kind of know what those opportunities might be, the different things on the feed and the handling and the management side that you guys do?
Sure, absolutely. So, so in my program that I manage, that is the grain storage feed manufacturing, that also covers animal nutrition and pet food. We have a variety of open enrollment courses more to the public. Like I mentioned, I have on the grain storage, grain elevator managers course that we do at least once or twice a year. And that's very focused just on the domestic market, despite the fact that there's sometimes internationals that want to attend. But we focus on how grain is moved between the companies in the U.S., and that's a different perspective. From that same program on the storage and handling, we do have a hands-on training course that it's very interesting, because we actually this is for operators and maintenance people, where we do a 2.5-day course on just hands-on training on handling equipment, conveyors, screw conveyors, buck elevators, and people from the feed industry come, mainly also grain elevators, sometimes in flour mills and other grain processing industries. We're also expanding, hopefully for next year. This year I can pull it off, but it's also kind of like a grain storage course focused for international buyers. So that'll be more for the international audience, more focused on tropical weather conditions for storage, which is different to what we do in the U.S. in a way. I mean, some things are similar, some are different, of course. On the feed manufacturing, we do a lot for the domestic market, regulatory PCQI trainings with the National Grain and Feed Association. We do 3 of those a year. We have our, like same as you guys, are in either late June is usually when we do it, open enrollment, IGP overall feed manufacturing course, which is just a general course of feed manufacturing. I'll aim it as a mid-level. We try to cover as much from receiving all the way to dispatch, loading of feed, all the process, and also handle a little bit of storage, of course, quality control, other things, hands-on activities there for quality in our feed mill and demos. We do have on the extrusion side, we have a very big, as you know, extrusion that is led by a colleague, Dr. Sajid Alavi. He does have his annual extrusion course that is happening within 2 weeks from now, always kind of like mid-August. Overall, from extrusion, they focus a lot on pet food aquaculture, but they also cover a little bit of how to make some products on the human side. So it's everything from the technology operations of extrusion. We do have several pet food courses. We have a pet food formulation that's usually around January. Then we do have a pet food processing that varies a little bit of the time, and that's kind of get changing as we get a new person helping to teach that. And then, of course, how to commercialize pet food. And that's open enrollment too, from that side. That's pretty much what I can remember, at least for my curriculum here off the bat. But we also have 2 more curriculums, like the grain procurement risk management led by Guy Allen, and everything from how to price discovery, marketing of grain, reduce risk, all those type of things, and transportation logistics. And then our grain processing, more milling, focus mainly on wheat, but also could be a little bit on corn for products that are going to go for the human consumption, led by Sean Thiele too. So those we have also plenty of courses and open enrollment too, from basic level to advanced level. So many of those things that we're doing. We also offer some courses online with different industry partners, trade associations, hybrid model that we call that with or blended that you take some online courses on your own time or live, and then you come on to more advanced level there at IGP or even offsite if needed. So different type of things that we're doing, kind of like right now we're trying to expand. We have expanded actually, not trying on the baking side, and that's not on the feed side, but it's important to know that we complemented that and looking into other things that could help improve on the feed side with more animal nutrition focused courses.
Sure, excellent. Well, the whole purpose of this podcast getting put out there was to give people an insight on what's going on in the feed industry, but also provide a little bit of education, or in this case access to knowing what those opportunities might be. And I think it's great that people know that at various different institutions and for various different skill sets and for various different parts of the industry, that there is probably something that amongst the group of us that kind of focus in this space, that there is probably something out there that if you want a little bit of continuing education or further education on something, that we're here to be able to do that. And there's lots of good opportunities there at IGP to take advantage of.
It's time for our famous three.
Okay, so we're gonna finish up here. We always ask all of our guests a few questions at the end, kind of in that same idea of giving people something to think about or potentially something to go look into. So the first question always is, do you have a particular resource that you would recommend to folks related to the feed industry or feed science that you have found particularly valuable? It could be a book or a periodical or a newsletter you get in your email box every week or so, or a website you really like, that you kind of think, hey, everybody should probably have this in their toolbox in order to be well informed or to educate themselves.
Well, of course, the feed technology book of AFIA, it's with the new version 5 or the new version 6, it's always a great tool. I mean, it's just a compilation of great technical guidelines and information into it. I also tap into a lot of the extension publications that you guys and NC State do, Kansas State. I think those all are resources. Of course, for international folks, keep in mind that those are made mainly for the domestic market, but they also apply in many cases. That usually is kind of like go into it. Sometimes of course, when I'm trying to think a little bit more into the scientific, I try to hit a little bit of the journals, the animal science, and then the area of the feed science there too. The European, some universities also have a lot of publications out there that are also very helpful. In Norway, I use one specifically for aquaculture because we have done a lot of aquaculture for the last couple of years and involved in several market development projects on that. So I think that will be pretty much. There's also several blogs out there. Angor Mix is one that I participate now and then, and there's also sometimes good information. You just have to keep an eye that look for reference, because a lot of people tell opinions but not be totally 100% accurate at the point or not applicable. And they do it in English, Spanish, and Portuguese for the Brazilian market too. So I guess those are pretty much the main, but I also sometimes go and ask different people, it's always good to have that expert from specific areas that like the equipment manufacturers too also are very, very helpful from that. So
absolutely. Okay, so on the not necessarily attached to our industry, anything, a really good book you've read or something else that you find particularly valuable from a management perspective or a leadership or staying informed on world events or anything like that you would, if someone said, hey, if I had some time to go read something, this would be something you would recommend.
Well, several things. There's a book, and it's kind of escapes me the name, but it's on key performance indicators overall. That it was actually recommended by Dr. Charles Stark, and that both of us know very well. I like that because you could. It's overall a general book on key performance indicators for many in this type of industries. but then you could think a little bit of your own industry, feed, animal production, nutrition, whatever the case is. That's one. It just cased me, and I'll be in my office. I just like turn and pull the book out. But that's something that I like to use as a reference every now and then. Then also, I always follow different magazines that send you newsletters for different industries. There's World Grain is one that I really enjoyed because they put a very international perspective, and also focus on very detail on the U.S. market too. From that. From that perspective, then I also follow a little bit of some of the aquaculture ones and pet food industry. Also, it's a magazine that also sends you newsletters, things like that. In essence, that's usually the ones I get a lot of them. I sometimes don't go in detail on them, but one that I also use as a resource is also feed stuff. That is, I think, is also. And I have memories of that being a kid, my dad reading feed stuff, it was kind of funny, but I still do. And those are also very, very good resources. Grain Journal magazine online or printed version also is a very good resource, especially they put a lot of focus on safety. So those are all there. I know I went back to the technical side of things, and I apologize, but I think I kind of tricked came up in my mind as we were speaking on it. So
yep.
Yeah,
no, that's pretty common. That's what a lot of folks do. And here's another one, because obviously we kind of live it, and that's what we spend most of our time reading or engaging with, right? So that's perfect. So the last question would be for those folks who are out there who are always trying to, professional development, get better at what they do. You've gotten to interact with a lot of folks from a lot of different industries, organizations, different countries, different regions. If you could pick a trait or two that you see in the most successful professionals that really makes them stand out and has made them successful in their chosen career path, what would you maybe identify that would be?
like a specific area.
Yeah, not necessarily a specific area of expertise, but a specific, more like character trait. We've had people talk about dedication, and we've had people talk about, people being particularly organized. Is there anything that stands out from all these people when you say, yeah, that person's very successful in their business, that person's very successful in their industry, and I can see that these people have this in common as far as the way they handle themselves?
Well, I'll answer it in a couple ways because they might not overlap very well. But one thing that for me is always kind of growing up in the feed industry and how I see it now, and even that in my family we make pet food, but more to that economic level type, is the pet food industry. Because they overlap with how. Now it's animal food, but with a human food type of deal, the way they handle things is a different perspective than traditionally how feed is made or animal food is made right now for the other different type of livestocks. And they always see it more, I always think that in the animal industry, we're making food, but it's a little bit different perspective. I see it more like a pet food. It's more like a business, not making that much of a food, be in that context. So that's something that always kind of is a different way that they handle, which is important because they bring different type of skills, especially on the marketing. They rely a lot of marketing and how to call the attention of the owner of that pet to buy that, from how it looks to a nutritional perspective or results, something like that. Another way to answer that, some countries that have a specific ways of handling the industry, it's always a little bit surprised me. And I would put, for example, the feed industry in Colombia. I mean, is very well developed, very professional, and they run it like an industry. Like somebody that runs a feed mill company could have been running, could be in the oil industry before, and then move to the car manufacturing. They just have that mindset of production, very professionalized and very, very organized. In fact, the feed industry there is under the All National Industry Association. So we're not separated they're not separated as the ag sector usually is look into it. So that's an example of it that I always kind of admire and follow a lot of the things that they do. they still come to training to the U.S. for the feed technical side of things, but I believe that they have that, and that's something very, very interesting. I think also in the European sector, they focus a lot on regulatory, but they always try to make it more. And that's very European in a way, how they handle everything, looking for the environment and to feed the needs of the community, which is not, I'm not saying the rest of industries don't do it, but countries don't do it, but it just kind of, in a way, it's very important to look what they do in a way that adapts to the situations that we have in our own country. So that's something probably that always calls my attention.
Gotcha. Very good. Well, it's been a great conversation. It was good to catch up. Once again, my guest today has been Dr. Carlos Campabadal from Kansas State University in the International Grains Program. Thanks a lot, Carlos. We appreciate your time.
No, thank you very much for the opportunity.
From North Carolina State University, I'm Adam Fairnoltz, and this has been the Feed Science Podcast.